of the Azure part of the Gimme Shelter series. We have 2 more episodes left, and then I will move into Microsoft 365 security. But in the next couple of episodes, we're going to talk about some of the tools for monitoring and maintaining governance and compliance and security incident handling within the Azure environment for both Azure resources as well as third-party and on-premises services. First and foremost, we're going to talk about is Azure Security Center. I'm Dwayne Natwick. I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP, also certified in both Azure and Microsoft technologies, particularly Security Engineer Associate for Azure, as well as a Microsoft 365 Security Administrator Associate. I am a Microsoft certified trainer and a regional lead for that program, and I am a cloud training architect lead for Obsagility and for the Skill Me Up Academy platform. So today we're going to talk about Azure Security Center and about things that we need to think about when we're talking about our security posture and how we're going to secure our resources within the Azure environment, as well as on premises. We're going to talk quickly about the cyber kill chain, and then we're going to talk more about the Azure Security Center features and how Azure policies work with that, how we get recommendations, our secure score, and how we can handle certain things like brute force attacks, as well as how we can secure our virtual machines with just-in-time virtual machine access. So when we think about security and we think about our security posture, we need to think about and understand the cyber kill chain. And many of you that might be in security understand this, but if you think about it and you think about when you're building a defense in depth strategy, you need to think about these different steps in the stages of a cyber attack. Typically most attackers are going to do some sort of level of reconnaissance before they actually carry out an attack. They're going to try and find a way, doing port scans and trying to identify ways into the environment, social engineering, different things within the environment, phishing schemes, those type of things, brute force dictionary attacks are all things that come into play in terms of that reconnaissance. That leads to then intrusion, where they actually get into the environment. They really start poking around at that point. They're not actually doing any damage or taking anything at that point. They're just really looking around and trying to see what they might have access to and trying to go undetected. Ultimately, they're trying to make sure that whatever they're doing, they're not going to be detected. And then they start to exploit and find ways to get into sensitive information. They try to then, escalate privileges, find ways to grant themselves more access, and then that starts to expand into lateral movement, where they start moving into different services. They find their way into a virtual machine. How do they find their way outside of that virtual machine into different things on the network? And then now they're trying to then cover their tracks as well. They want to make sure that they are untraceable, and that they cannot be found, in terms of a investigation, so that that nothing traces back to them. And one of the things that they might do as well as part of their attack then is denying service to those that really need access to service. Doing some sort of denial of service attack, where they are flooding the network and users and customers can't get on the network. And then finally, they're going to remove themselves, exfiltrate themselves from that environment. They've done their duties. They've done what they wanted to do. They've carried out their attack. They've accomplished what they want to accomplish, whether it's stealing certain data or denying service to users to cause financial harm to a company. then they're going to try and remove themselves, hopefully undetected from their standpoint. Hopefully from a security analyst perspective, they do not. And then they are done and they're off to their next victim. You can think about this, and many of you probably know the news and what happened in terms of the United States government and the attack that had taken place, and the bad actors that were apparently within the government systems for months and just poking around. And really, the government at this point doesn't really have an idea of who did it and what they got away with and what they got into, because they did such a good job of covering their tracks and poking around and moving around the system undetected for months, which is very dangerous and a very scary scenario. So one of the key things around Azure Security Center is what it can do and how it's a powerful tool to prevent, detect, and respond to both Azure as well as hybrid and multi-cloud type environments. And it can be utilized as your central source for viewing and looking at and understanding what's going on in your environment and what best practices are in place and what best practices might be helpful to put in place based on different security standards and compliance metrics that Microsoft has gathered, as well as things that are out there for the National Institute of Security Technologies, NIST, as well as HIPAA for healthcare in the United States, different other UK privacy laws. Those things can all be put into your environment, and you can then look at them in terms of best practices. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get into the demo showing Security Center. Azure Security Center works very closely with Azure Policy and Azure initiatives within Azure Policy to utilize certain default policies, as well as you can then also utilize your custom policies within there and use those for your governance of your environment for what you need it to do. So you might have your own set of compliance rules and policies that you have within your environment. You can utilize Azure Security Center to govern those, and you can then view your scores and your ability and controls that you have in place to continue to maintain that level of compliance, and provides a very nice dashboard then to show where that is. So it helps to then ensure that you are meeting all of your compliance and regulatory requirements, as well as best practices within the industry. And again, we'll talk about that and show a little bit more about that when we get into Security Center here in a moment. Security recommendations. It provides recommendations, and as I've mentioned a few times already, for best practices. And the screenshot's a little bit old. They've changed the interface a little bit, and we'll see that when we go in. But the nice thing is they're grouped by your services, so you can understand a little bit of what's going on within particular services, such as your compute and apps, your data and storage, your identity and access, and then other like serverless services like IoT resources. And they're grouped together in that manner because you may have different groups that are your administrators for those particular areas, so they can very easily go and go right to that section and look and see what needs to be done, what needs to be assigned for new controls to turn on, and things of that nature. And that all goes then into your secure score. And what the secure score then is a snapshot of where you stand with current best practices and what's recommended in terms of those best practices and those controls that need to be put into place. If you're scoring 65%, you might want to look and see what you can do to increase that score and add more points to that score to get yourself close to 100. You may not, there may be things that are being recommended that don't fit into your current environment, or you don't deem is a necessary vulnerability to adjust to. If it's, if there's you've done a cost benefit analysis to that particular vulnerability, and the risk and reward to putting that control in place doesn't make sense. The secure score, the goal is to get as close to 100 as possible, but as an organization, you may never get to that 100, and you may look at certain things and say, that's not worth me putting that control in place, or I don't need that control because that particular virtual machine isn't public facing, things of that nature. But the secure score helps as a guide and provides you with that list of recommendations, and you can understand where the recommended control, putting that in place, is going to affect and increase that secure score and help you out within the level of Microsoft best practices for security. Some things around brute force attacks and understanding brute force attacks, and this is a key thing when you're thinking about building your network and building your environment, is one of the key things around brute force attacks and attackers trying to exploit your network and get into your network, as I've mentioned in the kill chain, is that the first thing is reconnaissance. And this brute force attack is really around that reconnaissance. Is first and foremost what an attacker is going to do if they want to gain access to your environment is to scan port 3389 or port 22 for RDP or SSH for Linux. So if they're trying to get into a Windows machine, they're going to scan port 3389. They're trying to get into and infiltrate a Linux machine, they're going to look at SSH 22, and they're going to scan those ports, and you're hopefully have your controls in place where you don't have those ports open to the internet. And that's where we talked about network security groups a couple episodes ago, blocking those services. And there's a couple other capabilities within Azure to avoid that as well. And that's just-in-time virtual machine access. So just-in-time virtual machine access, what that does is you can close down port 3389 and port 22, but when somebody does need that management access to that virtual machine, the just-in-time virtual machine access capabilities allow that user to request access for a given amount of time, generally a maximum of 3 hours. You might need less. So when you request that time, you can set that. And what it does then is it opens that RDP port for that particular amount of time. And so you then only have that port exposed for a short amount of time. And an attacker is going to be spending more time than that trying to infiltrate your systems anyway. They're not going to, if they get a port scan, find their way in, they want more time than 3 hours anyway. So they're going to get kicked out, even if they do happen to get into that machine, hopefully. And what you can do when you create that just-in-time virtual machine access request is that you can actually have a policy where the administrators set only their IP address. So they can do a what's my IP, find their IP address. I mean, RDP is only given access for that specific IP address. And you can see the allowed source IP here. You can create an IP range, or you can have it just be my IP. So it's not a fully open range either. So they might see that port 3389 is open, but if they're not on your network or on your administrator's IP address, if they're not spoofing that, they're not going to get access either. They're going to get blocked. So very powerful tool from that standpoint. Another possibility and utilization of access is also utilizing the Bastion host service within Azure, which you then access and remote desktop into the virtual machine directly from the Azure portal and log in right from there rather than even starting an RDP session. It's doing it on the back end, and again, it's much more secure as well. So you have two different capabilities there. We didn't talk much about Bastion. Bastion is becoming much more popular and much more utilized rather than utilizing a jump box as many companies have used in the past for that essentially demilitarized virtual machine to get into a network to do service maintenance. But just-in-time virtual machine access can help you get that direct access to a virtual machine for a limited amount of time. Let's get into Azure Security Center and talk a little bit about that. So let's take a look at Azure Security Center a little bit within the Azure portal now. So we're in the Azure portal, and I've got Security Center right here within my recent services. I go into Azure Security Center quite a bit. You can also search up here using Azure Security Center, whatever, and it again shows up in my recent services. As I was saying, some of the screenshots within the slide deck were a little dated, but you can see here you still do have Secure Score. We have our regulatory compliance. A couple things around regulatory compliance and Azure Defender. These are only available if you've turned on the Defender license, what used to be the standard license, which is the paid subscription. If you are just starting out within Azure, you can turn on that subscription for 30 days, risk-free, just to try it, see if it works for you as an organization. If you do not, Azure Security Center is turned on at a free level anytime you launch a tenant or create a subscription for Azure. It's launched, and you do still get these recommendations here on the bottom right, or the Secure Score capabilities. So there's still a lot of powerful capabilities. One of the things that you do not get, and we can go in and here look at the pricing and settings here on our subscription. And you can see here, if we have Azure Defender off, we get the security recommendations and our Azure Secure Score. But the things that we don't get is some of the advanced threat protection capabilities, as well as regulatory compliance and just-in-time virtual machine access. So what I was talking about with just-in-time virtual machine access, we don't have that feature available to us without turning on the Defender license. And once we turn the Defender license on, you can see how the costs work, and you can actually toggle off certain things as well. So if you're only doing, if you only want to have virtual machine, just-in-time virtual machine access, you could just turn it on for your servers and utilize it that way. The key thing here is if you don't turn this on, you don't have that just-in-time virtual machine access, probably your best practice then is to utilize Azure Bastion for your access to your virtual machines. So let's go back to the dashboard here, and we'll talk about a couple other things here within dashboard before we close out this episode. So in Secure Score, you click on Secure Score, and like I said, you go into your subscription, and you can see the different recommendations then that can increase your Secure Score and by how much it's going to increase your Secure Score. Now these are listed as what probably has the biggest amount of impact on your environment as well. So the higher the score, the more impact it really has in your security posture. And you can see right off the bat, and I always get hit on this because it's my demo environment, is I don't have MFA on all my owner subscriptions, because I'll create administrators and delete administrators when I'm doing demos, and I don't enable MFA. Same thing with having write permission on my subscription. I've taken care of this particular one, but I have one subscription that I have owner permissions that aren't MFA enabled. Here we have some Defender, some things around SQL, and you can see I have completed putting Azure Defender on my SQL servers, but I have a couple of other vulnerability assessment pieces around my SQL servers that I have not done. And I can very easily remediate that issue by hitting this quick fix button. So one of the really nice things about Azure Security Center is some of these you can enable right away because of this quick fix button. The ones that don't have the quick fix button, and you click into those, it's going to give you some information here and generally tell you what's going on. I click the bad one here. That's just a vulnerability. If I manage access and permissions, if here external accounts, it's actually going to give you then your remediation steps. This is not a quick fix capability, but it gives you your manual remediation steps to take care of those issues. So last thing I want to look at is just-in-time virtual machine access and how that works. So if I go into one of my virtual machines, so let me go back here to virtual machines, and if I go into the connect to that virtual machine, it's going to say to improve security, enable just-in-time virtual machine access. So I don't have this enabled on here. If I probably drilled down a little bit more in my recommendations, that's probably one of them within my recommendations. And if I click here and do enable just-in-time, just like that, just-in-time's been enabled. And so now when I go to connect to that virtual machine, now that I have virtual machine, just-in-time virtual machine access enabled, here I can say all configured IPs, other IPs, or my IP, and now I can request my access. And what this is going to do is it's requesting access on the side. Once that's approved, that's when then I get my RDP file for that virtual machine. And we can, like I said, do some configurations of just-in-time virtual machine access within Security Center. I think that's now within, that's now within Azure Defender. And I can go in here and I can configure how this is utilized. It's going to tell you how it works and what you do here. And from there, we're good to go. We have just-in-time virtual machine access on this virtual machine. You can go in here and not configured. I have another virtual machine that's not configured for it, and we can remediate that as well. So that brings us to the end of this episode of Gimme Shelter Security in Azure. I hope you enjoyed it and have learned some good things around how you can utilize Azure Security Center as a centralized tool for monitoring and managing your security and compliance within your Azure environment, as well as with on-premises and third-party resources. Something I did not bring up around a lot of that is you can put agents out, and I think I talked about this when I was talking about the Azure Monitor in our previous episode, is if you can put agents on your IaaS services within other clouds or on-premises services and feed that information around those virtual machines and those resources into Azure Monitor and Log Analytics, which is ultimately the tool that is fed into Azure, the information that goes into Azure Security Center, as well as Azure Sentinel, which we'll talk about in our next episode. You can find me on the social media links provided on the slide and the YouTube channel that you are watching this video on. The link is available here as well. So keep up to date, subscribe, and I will see you next time for the next episode. Have a great day.